Good evening. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who in the past struggled in life without God, but then I chose recovery, and my name is Loni. My recovery began in 2004 at Divorce Care, and even I had to admit that something was really wrong. They had warned me not to get into a relationship for years, but I continued to make poor choices, and which I later recognized as codependency. Within a couple of years, I was marrying husband number 4. Someone at Divorce Care suggested an abortion recovery Bible study called Forgiven and Set Free. It was here that I first heard of Celebrate Recovery. Husband number 4 was an alcoholic. We went to a meeting and never returned. Upon completion of the post-abortion study, I was led to a 14-week sexual healing group for women who had been sexually abused as children. From there, it was suggested that I do an anger management program, and that lasted 32 weeks. So I spent an entire year in recovery. You think I needed some help? Well, I think so. I began sharing my abortion testimony in 2006, and it was the hardest thing for me to do. I was in my 50s, and I had never taken off any of my masks. In those early years, much of my testimony dealt with past events in my life, and I recognize now that those events are part of my biography. We all have a biography. The details may differ, but a wound is a wound, and trauma affects everyone to varying degrees. And the thread that joins us all here is pain. How we deal with that pain is why there are different groups to address that. And the reason why I love my recovery family is because this is the only community where I can be me. I don't need any masks. I don't need to impress anyone. I could just be me. I can share anything and not feel judged or condemned. It's where I feel the most comfortable. So I'm going to list just events that occurred in my life that caused trauma. So I was born in New York City to an immigrant, an Indonesian, who jumped ship and married a Puerto Rican dancer in New York City. I was born with a condition called blue blood, and most babies didn't survive that. But God chose to save my life. I was a sickly baby and required a lot of care. There were 3 other siblings, 2 from my mother's first marriage, as you saw in the picture, and then my brother. At 18 months, my mother must have hit a brick wall because she did the unthinkable. She set me on fire. I don't have an actual memory of the event, but the smell of something burning has always disturbed me. Then I learned in my early 30s that I hadn't been burned with boiling water. That's when I learned the truth. I also learned that my mother had tried to take the life of my 2 other half-siblings. They lived in a trailer, and she turned on the gas oven and left. And it was a neighbor who saved them. They finished being raised in foster care, and I don't know if my mother did time or if she went into a mental institution, but she was obviously a troubled woman. No one had ever spoken to me about this. And those of you that have gone through the steps, remember in book 1, the question is asked, what is your family secret? Well, that was my family secret. Every family has one. Every family. So the following day, in those days, early 50s, I was taken to Puerto Rico by my mother's mother, by my grandmother, because they didn't want to take me to a hospital in New York City. Questions would be asked. And in those days, she wrapped me up, and the next day I was in Puerto Rico. I never saw a hospital. She healed me the old-fashioned way on a farm, and I remained in Puerto Rico until I was almost 6. My dad had met another woman, another Puerto Rican woman, and he wanted to put his family back together, but they were all strangers to me. I didn't even speak English. She spoke Spanish, but she had no interest in speaking to me. And she had no interest in helping raise me either. My brother went with my father every morning, went to school near his business, and I was left behind with my stepmother. She put me in the care of her teenage nephew, who had just arrived from Puerto Rico. So he was really my only friend. He was the only one I could communicate with. My dad didn't speak too much Spanish either. Well, he sexually molested me at the age of 6. My innocence had been stolen, but I didn't see it that way. I thought that I had learned what love was. My father blamed me when my stepmother moved out because we were constantly arguing, and the beatings and the verbal abuse began. And he would scream that I was just like my mother, and that my love for music and dance would take me down the same road that my mother had chosen. Then at 11, someone told my father that my mother was living in California and that she wanted to meet her children, my brother and I. And I was led to believe that she had died, so this was news to me, and I was excited. I was excited to meet my mother for the first time. I had seen movies about California, Malibu, the beach, and I thought, oh, it must be beautiful. And I started planning the trip until my father said, no, you're going to camp. You have to learn how to ride horses. My father had this crazy idea that his daughter was going to be an equestrian and his son was going to be an Olympic star, but off to camp I went. So the name of the camp is Word of Life, a big ranch out on Schroon Lake in the Adirondacks of New York. And unbeknownst to my father, this was a Christian Bible teaching camp. It was there that I heard the gospel for the very first time, that first week. And that would be the best summer in my life, 8 weeks. And the first time I heard that pastor ask, does anyone want Jesus to come live in their hearts? I thought, oh, yes. I was so lonely. I thought, does he really want to live in my heart? Well, I was allowed to be a child, and I received Jesus as a child would, with so much faith. I didn't really know how to get along with other children, and that's when it had already begun, my lying, my fabricating what wasn't, and I told everybody about my great life in New York, which wasn't so, and after the end of 8 weeks, I went home, never picked up a Bible again. But I left knowing one thing. I knew that if I died, I was going to heaven. I knew that, without a doubt. Didn't have any more information about salvation except that I was going to be in heaven. And to me, heaven, if you asked me then, it was where they served pistachio everything, all the time, day in and day out. Okay? But the stories I would tell, it was because I watched TV. Some of you, I'm sure, remember Ozzie and Harriet, Leave It to Beaver, and okay. So those were the stories that I would tell. And as people would hear me throughout my life, when they would say, I was a process server at one time. That's the person that takes a legal document and serves it on someone. It can be dangerous, it can be. And I would take the most dangerous because they paid the highest. And my coworkers would ask me, what are you doing? Don't you know how dangerous it is going into the project's 22nd floor? I said, so what's the worst that can happen? And I said that over and over. So what's the worst that can happen? I die and I go to heaven. It's got to be better than this. So the next time I opened a Bible, it was when I was repenting for my first abortion. I was 14 years old, and that scenario would repeat itself 1 year later, the same boyfriend. And in those days, in the Latino community, they would have the kids get married, and they would live with one of the parents. But his parents wouldn't even consider that. In fact, they gave him the money to take me to it was a back alley abortion. Abortion wasn't legal yet. Twice. Both times I ended up in the hospital. Both times I should have died. But God chose life for me again and again. Now, as to God, I asked my dad when I was 8 years old, who is God? And he whipped out a $100 bill, and he said, "This is my God. And as long as I have this, I have everything I want." And you know what? He owned his own home, he had his own business, late model car, closed his store in the summertime, we traveled. Okay, made sense to me. So at the age of 13, he purchased fake IDs for me and my cousin John, who had just come in from Singapore. And we worked at the New York World's Fair. All right? That was a big to-do that lasted for a year, and I sold in the Japanese pavilion, and I learned how to make money. So I went to school from 9 to 3. I worked 4 to 10. My dad would pick us up. I learned about his God early in life. I was 14 when my brother began to sexually abuse me. I talked him out of raping me. I couldn't stay in that wicked house. I figured that if I ran away, the authorities would find me. They'd put me into a JV house, they called them at the time. I'd get 3 meals. I was very violent. I was a violent little girl. I hung out with the gangs. I could take care of myself, but they never picked me up. I ran away from home, and I just didn't look like a runaway. They didn't pick me up. I was in the Bronx, walking Simpson, and nobody ever approached me. So 2 months before my 16th birthday, I ran away, and I convinced my best friend to go with me to a gay club, to a girls' club, which was right next door to my brother's hair salon. I needed another plan. My father hadn't even reported me missing. I needed to do something. I lived in the Bronx on the worst street. So we went in, and I met a school teacher 16 years older than me, and within weeks, I was moving in with her. And I now know that she was a pedophile. In fact, all of her girlfriends had been her students or young. She didn't know I was only 16. I told her I was 18. But I was now in the life, and it was a lifestyle that I had chosen. I just feared getting pregnant again. And I never believed that I was born homosexual. I left the teacher at 19 and began waitressing, and that provided for my immediate daily needs. I became a little money-making machine, working from 6 a.m. to late evening and on weekends. And had I not become a workaholic, I certainly would have found something else to numb the pain. And then the next 40 years were filled with impulsive decisions, suicide attempts, 3 abortions, panic attacks, depression, 4 failed marriages, and giving birth to my one and only living son with husband number 1. He's the young man you see me pictured with a lot. I was with husband number 2 when my hard work began to pay off, or so it seemed. We were both real estate brokers, and we made lots of money, stupid money. When I became pregnant, he threatened to throw us out because he had not signed up for that. Well, I hadn't either. I had an IUD. I became pregnant. Well, it was either terminate the pregnancy, which at the time abortion had become legal, and I went on with life. We had become a swinging, yuppie couple of the 80s, and he didn't want anything to change that. My son was being raised by nannies, housekeepers, and valets, and I thought this was how to be happy. That's one of the lies of the world. Drive this car, you'll be happy. Wear this designer's clothes, you'll be happy. Live in that address, you'll be happy. Well, we did have multiple residences, and one of them was on Fifth Avenue. And my next-door neighbor, I had no idea would become the President of the United States. Donald Trump was our neighbor. I sent my son to the same high school he went to thinking, we're in real estate. He's in real estate. No, no. It really began and ended with that. He was in my home once with his first wife, who is now deceased. And throughout all that, I remember standing, looking at St. Patrick's Cathedral, saying, okay, if you live there, so what's this all about? I worked hard, I made all this money, so how come I'm not happy? My mother has never called me, ever, on my birthday. Did she forget that she gave birth to me? What's that all about? Psalm 27:10 says, "My father and mother abandoned me. I'm like an orphan, but you took me in and made me yours." God gave us the 10 commandments, but I was living by life's commandments. Drive this car, wear that clothing, you'll be happy. I wasn't happy. My husband had become addicted to porn, sex, and drugs. I was forced to leave. Then the market turned, and we were accused of absconding with our investors' money. Our names made the newspaper. It was horrible. It was 2 years of a legal battle. They never convicted. They didn't find anything. The worst was poor bookkeeping procedures. That stress was worse than I ever experienced. It was then that I picked up new addictions because even working wasn't happening. And I acquired a porn addiction, and that's how I coped. Genesis 50:20 says, "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring it about as it is this day." On a sunny fall morning, God finally got my attention. I was an independent paralegal and popular process server. On this particular morning in September 2001, I was preparing to travel into the city. I was having a bad hair day. I looked like Chaka Khan. I had a permanent. And I said, these people aren't going to take me serious. I have to take a statement on an elevator accident. So I called up at 7:30, canceling my 9 o'clock appointment. That was 9/11, September 11, 2001. I told them I'd be there on Thursday. Thursday never came. Not for the Twin Towers. I knew my life had been saved, but I didn't know why. And when I saw the image of a woman throwing herself from one of the towers, she was wearing a suit similar to what I was going to wear, and I couldn't understand. Why is she falling to her death? And I'm sitting here in my kitchen watching this on television. I bet you she didn't have 3 abortions. I bet you she was a better mother than I was. I bet you she never cheated on her husband. Why? What was this all about? Well, I ended up in church like a lot of other New Yorkers did that day. And I chose the smaller church that you could see in fact, the cross is very much like this one. And I sat in a row with a whole bunch of other New Yorkers, and I said, you know, I couldn't recite the Lord's Prayer to save my life. I don't know what to call you, God, Mr. God, but I know that you saved my life, and I don't know what to do about that. So I'm just going to sit here until you tell me what to do. Well, by November 2001, I was a full-time resident of Florida. I joined my son, who had come down in 1999, met his wife. My first grandchild had been born. And he took me to church on New Year's Eve, and I thought, this is weird. This must really be a cult. First of all, look at all these people, 20,000 people in one church, 4,000 at a time. There's something, you know. So I just warned my son not to go on any field trips or drink any Kool-Aid, and if the pastor's name was David and he lived in Waco, Texas, we weren't going, you know, that whole thing. So I said to my son, fine, I'll go to church with you. I'm going out. Because in my world, the way you end a year and the way you begin it sets the tone. I was dressed. I had my high heels on. I knew where Coco Locos was. I knew where all the dance places were. And I flew solo my whole life. I didn't need girlfriends to call or to have anyone with me. And that pastor, Bob Coy, I was sitting way in the back because I figured as soon as this thing is over, I am out of here, start my new year. And way down there, he made an altar call. And I heard my name. I know I heard my name. And I saw that long aisle, and I thought, I better take these high heels off because I'm going to make a fool of myself by tripping. And I ran down that aisle. I ran down that aisle, and my life has never been the same again. Oh, yeah. Well, my salvation would not prevent me from making more poor choices. A few years later, I would suffer a nervous breakdown, and it was in that hospital, in that brokenness, that Jesus, my Savior, held his hand out, and this time I took it, and I haven't let go since. Zechariah 8:13 says, I will rescue you and make you both a symbol and a source of blessing. My story is in several places in the Bible. One of them is the woman at the well. She meets Jesus. He tells her who you are, who that man is at home, how many husbands you've had. And I'm like, oh, wow. But that woman ran back to her village to proclaim that she had met the Messiah. And the whole village got saved. This woman did what she's done her entire life. I went back. I said, chump, get up. We're going to get married. What? I'm a Christian now. We got to get married, okay? That's all there is to it. We're getting married. So we got married. That was husband number 4. And I went back and I said, God, I fixed it. I'm good. I'm married. I'm legal. I'd done that my whole life. So your story's in the Bible too, but you got to read the Bible. You got to read it over and over and over again. And every question that you've ever had, because people would say, oh yeah, when you meet Jesus, you'll have this list of questions. And I did early on, when I was learning, and I had all these questions, and now I don't have the list anymore. Every question has been answered. Every single question. So I learned to serve God early on. He made me a facilitator of the abortion recovery study, and I did that for 8 years. I co-authored an abortion recovery workbook based on my best friend's devotional, Brick by Brick. I currently serve on the board of Deeper Still, an abortion recovery retreat in Georgia. And on several occasions, I've been asked to speak at the UN. Those are pictures at the UN, on how bad abortion was and why countries should not legalize it. Psalm 105:1 says, give praise to the Lord, proclaim his name, make known among the nations what he has done. They had to know what Jesus had done for me and how I had been forgiven and restored in spite of my lifestyle. I'm serving as a helpline coach on H3 Helpline. We receive calls 24/7 from anyone who needs healing from an abortion experience. This is not limited to the mother or father, but also to the person who may have driven her, or grandparent, or someone who had paid for the procedure. I've served in CR as a training coach over at Calvary, Fort Lauderdale. I facilitated the 12 steps and open share groups. I'm in prayer that these recovery organizations meetings will acknowledge that abortion is definitely a condition that should be approached and addressed like prisons and veterans and mental illness. In 2013, I raised my hand to volunteer in prison ministry. God pulled me out of the mega church, helped me plant a new church, and they said, who wants to be in prison ministry? I said, well, I did some of that at Calvary, and it went well with the women in Pompano. When Buddy makes the announcement, I said, Buddy, where is this prison? Oh, it's down in Miami. Oh, okay. How many inmates? 2,000. 2,000? How many women? He says, there are no women. I said, what do you mean there are no women? No, it's an all-male facility. I said, are you kidding me? I just trained 12 women to go into an all-male facility? Don't you think you should have said something? Actually, I was the one that had the problem. And that night, my talk with God was, what are you doing? You know my issues. What are you doing? How could you send me into an all-male prison? Well, I'd known by then that the most important thing in your relationship with your Savior is your obedience. And I was angry. But I went. I went. I complained, but I went. I served at that prison for 4 years. I facilitated a purpose-driven life. My church went every month to offer a service. I served as the civil sponsor for the incarcerated veterans. Incarcerated veterans. No, I'm first-generation American. No one in my family has ever served. This was like my opportunity to serve my country. Incarcerated vets. It was just the most amazing thing. It was here that I also met the man that I would spend the rest of my life with. You'll have to wait to hear him tell that part of the story. But actually, he gave his testimony here, and he doesn't tell that part of this story. So we'll have to have a part 2, Rochelle. I have been blessed with 3 wonderful grandchildren. You've seen their pictures. 2 have graduated college. The baby is going into her 3rd year of college. I'm grateful to serve a God of second chances since I wasn't such a great mother. But man, did I turn out to be a great grandmother, and not because I knew what to do. The Bible told me. Talk to them. You know, when you're playing with them at the playground, tell them about me. You know, when you're putting them to sleep, sing to them about me. Talk to them about me. I got 3 Jesus-believing grandchildren that know that there's nothing that will ever happen to them that Jesus can't help them with. And as to mothers, you know, there's the verse that says he will restore everything that the enemy took. Oh, yeah. That hole, that huge hole that I thought could never be filled. How do you fill a mother's hole? You just can't. I didn't get 1, 2, 3 women. I got, well, Amy is here tonight, and that alone is such a huge blessing. She's one of the women who were like spiritual moms. When I had problems with my husband, all right? And that's when I knew that the steps work, by the way. That's when you know when the steps work. Because you're doing fine, and then all of a sudden a crisis hits. Oh, what do? What have I learned to do? I got to get to a meeting, okay? And that was my first knee-jerk reaction, get to a meeting. It was Amy that prayed me through. She was the one, all right? My girlfriends, they would tell me, oh, leave that guy. You know, divorce husband number 5. Hello? Do you think maybe I've been doing something wrong? All right? Well, the Bible says that older women should come alongside of the younger women. And now that really is me. I'm the older woman now. And really, I met Jesus at 50. I'm 72. My spirit's only 22 years old, all right? My body is broken down, but my spirit is still young, and that's what I want to do. I want to tell the younger women who he is, what he can do for them, what he can do for your marriage, what he can do for everything. And I'm grateful that I know that I'm going to spend eternity with all of these people that I have met throughout my life. Oh yeah, Joel 1:25 says, so I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten. And he even restored my innocence. And I know you're saying, she's like, no. He restored my innocence. I started this innocence journey. I brought some girls with me for, accountability. We can do this. We can do this. No lust issues, okay? No watching anything. If I saw a billboard that I gazed at just a little bit too long, I chose another route. My coworkers would ask me, why do you take the turnpike? The tolls and all. Didn't tell them why, but I fought for my recovery. I didn't want to go back to being, chained to anything. Absolutely not. And if it meant a few more bucks or if it meant some more time, so be it. How am I doing on time? Speaking of time. I celebrated 9.5 years of purity. I met my husband. I told him, we're doing it God's way. He said, yeah, what way is that? I said, I didn't think you knew. Okay. God designed marriage. He designed sex. And he designed, it's really clear. Sex is for married people. That's it. Okay? So that's how we did it. We got married, and then we had sex. So, I never believed that I could live without sex or lust, and I had it here. You never saw me walk into one of those movies. You never found one of those tapes in my home. I had it here. I played my own tapes. I had my own script. I turned it on and off. So I needed the renewal of the mind that the Bible speaks of. And I did. It took me 3 years, but I did it. The little girl within, well, now she's as white as snow. And my husband says that that was the best gift he had ever received. I worked hard at my recovery, going to meetings regularly, having an accountability network, and always having a sponsor. And yeah, I had a crisis come up. I did what I had to do. And now I'm in Cape Coral, and I love it here. My life verse is the first part of Revelation 12:11. And they overcame him, the enemy, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. I love you, my forever recovery family, and thank you for letting me share, and God bless you all.